Believe it or not, this isn't the dumbest thing in the whole thing.
You know, George.
What? Hey, you're not racist.
He's like, preferences.
Can I actually get more butter with that?
Yeah, of course. You cannot make this up.
Sakana.
Okay,
So we're dealing with the harchakot, the various, the distancing that a husband and wife have to do during the needed period. So in the case of illnesses that is not defined as life-threatening, the halacha may depend upon who is ill and who is engaging in the caregiving. If the woman is ill, the commentaries dispute whether her husband may touch her while he's assisting her. According to Beis Yosef, that we learned last week, it's forbidden. While the Darchei Moshe, the author of the Darchei Moshe is, of course, the Ramah. Cites Rishonim who permit it. The Darchei Moshe, Yordea, Kuf Tzadikei, Uv'chol Odidei, in her illness, Ein Kpeda Kol Kach, there's not such a protest. The Efshar L'Shamish Ima B'chol Lehad Kan L'Shono. He quotes the Truma Sadesh in a Rishon that the husband can care for the wife. Omnam B'Sharei Dora B'Hagah Kosav the Yesh Matirin Afilu Hichola Ad Kan L'Shono. He brings another raya from the Shari Dora, same thing that the husband can care for the wife. Vani Matzati Hagah B'Mordechai. The Ramah found a gloss on the Mordechai in Masechta Shabbos, the Shiltei Giborim, that said, "Shekasav is Elishono, Kasav Haram." The Maram said, "Osan shenizorim, miliga b'neshoseyim nidos kashen cholos, shezeu chasidos shel shtus." That's being a chassid, but a foolish chassid, because really you're allowed to do it. Now, so we have a machlokes that between the Beis Yosef and the Ramah. The machlokes continues in the Shulchan Aruch. The Beis Yosef was when Rav Yosef Karo was commenting on the tour. Eventually, Rav Yosef Karo wrote the Shulchan Aruch, and the Ramah is of course there as well, not related to. I mean, it's the same authors as the Darchei Moshe. Machlokes continues Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, where the Shulchan Aruch forbids a husband from caring for his wife using physical contact, while the Ramah permits if no one else is available to help and the need is great. Isha chola v'hi nida atzur bala ligaba kedei l'shamsha k'gon lakima lashchiva u'lesomcha, like help her stand up, help her lie down, cover her. The Ramah says yesh oimrim di'im ein la mi sheyim hashmena, if there's nobody else to care for her, mutar bakol v'chein noagim im tzricha harbe lakach, if there's a great need. So we see here's a situation with Ramah is lenient. By contrast, if the husband is ill, the Shulchan Aruch agrees that his wife may tend to him. Im hu choleh ve'ein lo mi sheyishameshnus zulatah, and there's no one to care for him except the wife. Muteres l'shamsho, she's permitted to care for him. Rak shetizav yoter shetuchal merchatzat panav, she should refrain from washing his face. Yodav glove, like we learned last week, there's a special act of intimacy, washing his face, washing his hands and legs, vatsasamita b'fanov, and making the bed, that they should refrain from. The Shach explains that the difference between the man's illness and that of his wife pertains to the level of concern present for desire getting the better of the person. When he is ill, this concern is less relevant. The dafka kishuchola, the Hebrew shari, when he is sick and she is healthy, it's permitted. The kivan decholahu lekalamechash leher galavera. Nobody has intimate thoughts when he's sick. The ein yitzra miskaber alav, his yitzhara is not strong. Because he's physically weak. Aval kishehi chola, v'hu bari. But it's not so the opposite. If she's ill and he's healthy, ikalamechash leher galavera. There you still have to be concerned that he's going to have improper thoughts. Shama yizgaber yitzra alav yifaisena. Maybe his yetzer hara will get the best of him, convince her to go along with him. That's the shita of the Truma Sadeshan. That's why we have a svara, why there's a difference between who gets sick here. Now, even in the case where the man is ill, where the Shulchan Aruch is lenient in cases of need, the Achronim dispute whether the wife may help him if she can hire someone else to provide the man with his physical support. According to Rav Vosner, the Shevet HaLevi, they need not spend money on hiring such a person, and the wife can do it. But Rav Mordechai Eliyahu holds that they are required to spend money to hire someone, rather than allow the wife to care for him. Says the Shevet HaLevi. By the way, yesterday I visited with the Bezdin of the Shevet HaLevi. The Rav Vosner passed away a few years ago, so Rav Shol Klein is the posek at the Ma'anei Yeshua in Bnei Brak, and he's one of the Mamale Makomos who follows in the shita of Rav Vosner. And Rabbi Lebar and I wrote a sefer on Tzuadaka, which we learned. No, we didn't learn. It's in Even HaEzer. We haven't learned that yet. On injuries of the genitalia, so you're not allowed to get married. I went to meet with Rav Shol Klein in his Beis Horah, which is right in the Ma'anei Yeshua. Very interesting. And I went through 10 specific questions with him, and almost in each one, he told me, "Oh yeah, and this is how Rav Vosner would hold in these complicated cases," because they did Shimush, Rav Klein, and these are all elderly poskim themselves. But Rav Vosner was also very elderly when he passed away. So Rav Klein and Rav Shmuel Lezer Stern, they both live in Bnei Brak. They continue the tradition of Rav Vosner, who give the psak primarily for the Hasidic community in Bnei Brak, but they're pretty much the poskim in general for Bnei Brak. So it's just interesting that the legacy of Rav Vosner continues. B'shut Rav David ben Zimra, this is the Shevet HaLevi writing, Kosav, Kishabal Cholen, the Medina Shori L'Shamsho, when the husband is sick, and Mikra Din, we saw that the wife can care for him. Ein tzarich liskor adam acher b'tashlum. You don't have to go to the extent of hiring someone else to pay for that. Kishen achem shisham shebechinam, when there's no one who would do it for free. Aval b'seif kishehi chola, right? But in the other chapter where they talk about when she's sick, chayavim l'chapes kol avshor shelo l'shamsha. Then they should look for an outside person. Va'afilu botzos mama. Says the Darchei Tahara, the Mordechai Eliyahu, im abal choleh, ve'enu misagal listader b'kochot atzmon, he needs help. B'tzarch she'azru b'kimo v'shchiva v'chadom, he has to be helped to sit up, to lie down. Osur li'ish l'tapel bo. He gives a blanket isser. Elim kein ein odam acher she'yitapel bo zulasa, unless there's nobody else to do it. Achim yesh mi she'yitapel bo. But if they can find someone, El Shadoris Char al Shimusho, he's demanding payment. Yishalmu schar. He says it's better to hire somebody than having the wife do it. V'lo titapel bohi. Ulam, im ein lahem kesef, k'dei lizkor dem l'shem kach, ein tzrichim l'lavois. They don't have to borrow money. Elo titapel bo ishto. So you see, there's about focus how far the stringency should go. What about reciting Dvorim Shabigdusha and touching sacred articles? Chazal and the Poskim have instituted many harchakos to ensure that a woman who is a nida does not come into contact with her husband in a manner that might lead to violating the prohibitions of having relations with a nida, which is liable to kores. Are there any other restrictions imposed upon a woman who's a nida regarding other aspects of religious life? As we shall see, the poskim discussed the possibility that perhaps a nida should not attend shul or gaze at a Sefer Torah while she's a nida. The Ramah mentions that in the Middle Ages, many women had the practice to refrain from attending shul and from looking at the Sefer Torah while in a state of nida. He writes that although the primary halachic approach is that this is permitted, in his time it was customary, it was a minhag, to avoid these actions, at least during the time of active bleeding. The Ramah says, Yesha Kosvu, she'en li isha nida b'mei re'iyasa likanas beis hakneses. A woman who's seeing blood should not go to shul, only spalel, not even daven, or lahazkir Hashem, to say the name of Hashem, or liga b'sefer, or touch a holy sefer. V'yesh oimrim shemutaris b'chol. Some say all of that is permitted. Says the Ramah v'chein ikar, and that opinion is the correct one. That mikra adin, a woman can do all those things. But the custom developed in the European cities, not for her not to do those things. Now, during the time where she's counting her 7 clean days, it's permitted. Even where there was a minhag, some people would refrain from doing that even in the Yomim Noiroim, even in the Yemei Libun. He says the minhag is even there at that time. Chai Gavna, in the same vein, Sharabim Mitasrim Lechet Lebeis HaKnesses, when many people are going to shul, Mutar Selech Lebeis HaKnesses Kishar Noshim. She can go with other women to shul. Ki hula em li tzavan gadol. Otherwise, they'll be depressed. Shakol Mitasrim Vehem Yamdu Chutz. If they would have to stay outside, they would feel bad. So the Ramah Matirs, the Mishnah Berurah comments that by his time, we're talking about 300 years later, the common custom in Europe was for women with nida status to attend shul and daven. Nevertheless, he says, based on the Chaye Adam, that they should not gaze at the Sefer Torah when it is raised in the air for Hagbah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Uvimdinosenu, in our countries, we're referring to the European countries, Noyagin Heter La'olam, it's a completely permitted item. Umavarchos, mispadalos, they make brachas, they daven, v'makom, lo'istaklu b'sefer Torah b'shasha magbinos l'haros la'am. That when they're in a state of active bleeding, when the person does Hagbah and people look at the Sefer Torah, they should refrain from doing so. The Yalkut Yosef writes, this is the Sephardic poskim, who writes in the name of Avadia, Yosef, writes that women who are in the status of Nida are obligated in all aspects of Tefillah and Brachos that they are normally. He also writes that according to the letter of the law, it's permitted to look directly at the Torah scrolls. The women may refrain as a chumrah if they so choose. Even when they are bleeding. They're chayav to daven and make brachos. In fact, it's an isser they should not refrain. That during their cycle they shouldn't go into a shul. Even though from the strict letter of the law, it's permitted. They're allowed to be stringent. It's not considered a midas shtus or chasidus ashtus. Many contemporary Ashkenazi poskim also note that all the practices discussed above are within the realm of minhag, custom. Even the Ramo would agree that according to the strict halacha, the operative principle is that words of Torah are not susceptible to ritual impurity. Divrei Torah is einan mekabel tumah. On this basis, some have argued that whenever local custom is not explicitly otherwise, there's no reason to forbid any prayer or synagogue practices, including looking at the Sefer Torah to women, because they're in a state of nida. And the Marea Bazak, which is from Eretz Chemda, they have a whole tshuva on it. They give you the reference for it on the bottom. What about visiting a cemetery? He says an additional custom mentioned by the Mishnah Berurah with regard to the nida period is refraining from visiting a cemetery. Od kasav, shlo yikansel beis hakvaros ad she'itavlu. Until they go to the mikveh, they shouldn't go to the cemetery. Rav Ovadia Yosef writes that even those who observe this custom may still visit the cemetery on specific occasions. Yesh noshim shenoagos lachmi b'mei riyosam, she'enan holchos lebeis hakvaros. They don't go to cemeteries. V'gam hanoagos lachmi lo chmir el b'mei riyosam. The chumrah is only when they're actually seeing bleeding, but when they're keeping the 7 clean days, they could go. Even when they're seeing active bleeding, during the Shiva, if someone's observing Shiva, they can go on the final day of Shiva, at the end of the Shloshim, Uvyom Kiddush Hashanah, on the yard site, Uvakamas Amatseva, unveiling the headstone. The various days of the year where there's a minhag to visit a cemetery, Kagon be'erev Rosh Chodesh Nisan, uve'erev Rosh Chodesh Elul. Those are the exceptions where even if they were seeing Riyaz Dam, they'd be allowed to go. Okay, that concludes the harchokos that we learned. Any comments, questions, oros?
I guess I'm having a hard time seeing the similarity between a woman lechora not being attending tefillah or gazing at the Sefer Torah. How do you compare that to a Beis HaKvaros? Where is the kedusha of a Beis HaKvaros anywhere near a Beis HaKnesses or a Sefer Torah?
Well, but there's tzaddik, people, there's people go to daven by Beis HaKvaros. They're davening by kivrei tzaddikim. The tzaddikim's the neshama hovers there. That's why people go to daven there. It's probably because of tefillah burning, because there's a lot of tefillah done there.
Okay,
And there's a certain obviously a certain status of holiness there.
That today, these customs are just generally not followed. That's in my perception. Even women touching the Torah is not considered a problem. But
Right. I think if we see the Mishnah Berurah, right? The Mishnah Berurah said that Bismanenu, according to Mishnah Berurah,
say
that said, Noagim heter lo muvachos mispalos. He says lo yistaklu b'sefer Torah when they lift it up. Okay. Okay, we're going to go to page 221, the laws of Chatzitzah. So now we've been, going in a cycle here. We talked about what creates the status of nidus? How does she enter into the status? And now we're going to go through the process of how she leaves the status of Tumah after the Zayin Nikiyim and goes to the mikveh to be Matayr herself. So we have to understand the laws of Chatzitzah, things that separate between the waters of a mikveh, which would invalidate the Tvila, right? We have learned the previous year that a woman who's a Nida must count Shiva Nikiyim, 7 clean days, during which she performs multiple bedikos to ascertain that she's no longer bleeding. Upon the conclusion of the 7 days, she's ready to immerse in the mikveh as the final step of purification. The halachot related to immersion in the mikveh are part and parcel of the Hilchos Nida, and a couple must be as familiar with them as with the rest of the process. The halachos of immersion are comprised of 3 major categories. The halachos pertaining to the immersion itself, the halachos related to the mikveh, and the halachos for preparing for proper immersion is 2 of the aspects. In the next few shiurim, we will discuss some of the main halachic issues related to performing a proper immersion, beginning with the laws of Chatzitzah. Barriers. The primary objective of the preparation that a woman has to do before she goes to the mikveh is so a person immerses completely within the mikveh water with nothing separating between the person and the water. Such separations are known by the term Chatzitzah. In the event that there's a Chatzitzah upon the body that interposes between the body and the water, the immersion is ineffective, and one must immerse the entire body again. Now, what's the yisodos, the foundations of the halachos of Chatzitzah? The Gemara in Sukkah concludes that the problem of Chatzitzah is a doraisa. However, not every item that separates between a person and mikveh water constitutes the same level of Chatzitzah. Some things are considered Chatzitzot midoraisa. Others are only barriers midrabanan. And some things are supposed to be removed merely lechatchila. Lechatchila, if you did it, it should be done. But if it wasn't done, b'diavad, the ex post facto, the tvila would be okay. The Gemara Nida explains the rules to how to classify the various types of Chatzitzah. In Masechet Nida Amar Rav Yitzchak, Dvar Torah, Rubo Hamakpid Alav. Let's say a worker comes home, his body is covered with dirt, the majority of his body, and he's covered with something that he's makpid, that he wants it removed. It's not something that he would tolerate to remain on his body. So if you have 2 aspects, it's covering 51%, and he's makpid, he doesn't want it to be there. So that's a Chatzitzah. Rubo ve'eno makpid alav, eino chotzitz. Let's say he comes home and he's got some dust on 51% of his body. It's not something that he would be makpid to remove. So that would not be a Chatzitzah if he went to a mikveh. However, Gozru al Rubo she'ena makpid mishum Rubo hamakpid. That's already a rabbinic zera. That since it's 51%, we don't care that he's not makpid. That's a rabbinic zera that you should remove it before going to the mikveh. The Gozru al miuto hamakpid also mishum Rubo hamakpid. Let's say that the mud that he would be makpid on is covering only 30% of his body, a miut of his body. It's another gzeira because of the hakpoda status. So either because of the rubo status or the hakpoda status, we'll go there. So 3 out of the 4 cases, the first case, rubo hamakpid is midoraisa. The other 2 cases, either rubo that is not makpid or miuto, are chatzitzot only midrabanan. What about the 4th case? The ligs are nami al miuto she'eno makpid mishum miuta makpid. Maybe if is covering his body his only minority of his body, and it's something that he's normally not makpid on, maybe we should be goyzer that. No, he gufa gzeira. The gzeira of miuto was a gzeira itself, and we're going to come v'anan nekem v'nigzer gzeira l'gzeira. That's a general rule in Chazal that they're not goyzer on a gzeira. They're goyzer on a doraisa, but on a rabbinic thing that's already also nigzer on, they don't institute another gzeira. So that's the yesod from the Gemara in Masechta Nida Samach Zayin. According to the Gemara, an object is considered a Chatzitzah by Torah law only if it covers most of a person's body, and the person is insistent that it should be removed. If only one of those conditions is true, then the item is considered a Chatzitzah only according to rabbinic law. Accordingly, if an item or substance covers most of a person's body but doesn't bother them, or it covers a minority of the body but does bother the person, the substance or item is a Chatzitzah M'Rabanan. It's evident from the Gemara that if an item or substance covers a minority of a person's body and the person does not insist upon removing it, then it does not constitute a Chatzitzah and would not invalidate the immersion. As we will see shortly, though, you still should remove it lechatchila. You shouldn't just leave it on. If the woman goes to the mikveh, there's a mikveh lady there, and it's a minority on her body, and usually it's not something that people would be makpid on, they will still advise her to clean it from the lechatchila to get rid of it. But if it's discovered only after the case, she had already gone to the mikveh and hadn't removed it, but they'll say it's okay. Rishonim disagree whether the definition of makpid, being particular in makpid, depends on one's personal feeling or on the feeling of most women. I mean, there are some women that are very finicky about anything. Or do we go after, most women would consider this a hakpada. According to the Rambam in Mikvos, a person's personal feeling determines whether the item is a chatzitza. According to the Rashba and Torah Sabayis, we follow kol deis, right? We follow the standards of most people concerning hakpada. Of course, the Shulchan Aruch clearly follows the Rashba, which he does many times, and rules to follow the standards of most people concerning hakpada. Therefore, if most people are makpid about a particular substance on the body, so it's a chatzitza, even if that person individually is not makpid on it. Although the Shulchan Aruch does not address the reverse case, where most people are not makpid, but the person in question is, the Shach and Taz rule that it also constitutes a chatzitza. So either way, if the general people are makpid, it's considered hakpada. And if an individual person is makpid on something, even though most people are not makpid, according to Shach and Taz, the super commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, they would consider it a chatzitza. Tzricha shetidbol, says the Shulchan Aruch in Yoredei Kuf Tzadik Ches. Tzricha shetidbol kol gufa b'pamachas. She has to immerse in the mikvah at one time. So at that time there should be no chatzitza. I feel kolshu. Kolshu is a minute amount. If it's a substance that's on her that in general people would want to remove, it's a chatzitza. Even though this particular woman doesn't care about it. Or might never care about it. If majority of women do care to remove such an item, that's how we follow. If it covers the majority of her body, even if that's the gzera we learned in the Gemara, that if it's the majority of the body, even though it's something that most people are not makpid on, must be removed. The Ramos cites another chumrah from the Hagos Shari Dora, that ideally one should even remove substances that are miyut ve'eno makpid. covering a minority of her body with things that people don't care about. They cover only a minority of the surface, do not bother the person. Even though technically they don't invalidate the immersion, like we said, l'chatchila they should do it. L'chatchila lo titba afilu b'dvarim she'enan choytzitzin. Gzeira otu dvarim ha-choytzitzin. The poskim, including Rav Vosner, Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, affirm that after the fact, b'di'evid, or in extenuating circumstances that we will deal with later, if one is already immersed under such conditions, the immersion is effective, like the Gemara learned. Says the Shevet HaLevi, Im tov lafilu b'mezid, if she went in without removing the substance, in that when it's something that does not constitute a typical Chatzitzah, also lo tefillah. V'chein b'shas adchak, extenuating circumstances, havi k'di'eved v'shori. L'chatchila en leisha litvol b'dvorim shaleh. Again, anything that she has on her, she should remove. Av she'enan chotzitzim ve'ein makpid alav. Technically, they're not considered Chatzitzah, and they're not makpid on it. Like we said, there's no gzeira on top of gzeira. However, if she's still there in the mikveh and they identify that there's something like that on her, she should go out, clean herself off, go back and do a proper tefillah. B'li bracha. Ach b'di'eved eino tzricha lachzor lidbo. But in the if she was home already, she doesn't have to go back. The tefillah is considered a good tefillah. Now, as part of his discussion, Rav Vosner questions the premise of the Ramah that a woman should remove even an item that does not technically serve as a Chatzitzah. Didn't the above Gemara, cited directly and explicitly, illustrate that such a practice is unnecessary? We would be issuing a decree to protect another decree. So, how does Rav Vosner explain up the Ramah? B'achronim niskashu, the ein makor l'gzeirazu. When the poskim learned the Ramah, they said, "Where is the makor for the Ramah's stringency? That l'chatchila she should remove even that as well." I mean, the Gemara explicitly said she doesn't have to. Adarabba, just the opposite. Arnu b'Gemara davi gzeir l'gzeira. V'im kein ech nigzar b'masha Chazal kavu shein ligzar. I mean, this is an example where Chazal said specifically not to be goyzer, and we're going to go ahead and be goyzer. Omnam yesh lefarish. So Rav Vosner explains, we're not talking about a gzeira regarding the issue of, well, will be goyzer eino makpid because of the makpid status. No. Ela the chayshin lechisoron yediya etzel bnei adam. It has to do with a doubt. Most people don't really understand the concept of hakpada. They have something on it. They don't know, oh, if it really doesn't bother me, I don't have to remove it. Kind of. Most people don't know that halacha. And we sometimes don't have the gedorim, the guidelines, carefully, even in our own minds, of what's considered hakpada or not. So any kind of Chatzitzah, even if it was on a minority of the body and it was not makpid, because people don't really understand what does that mean, hakpada, the Ramah was goyzer. That's his first attempt to reconcile the Ramah against the Gemara. Al yesh lomar, the choshesh gam beino makpid, even in cases where in general people were not makpid on those items, kivan shegeter hakpada toli gam benoshim acheros. Because we talked today, hakpada has to do with all women, not just that specific woman. Even though she doesn't care about it, maybe other people do care about it. I really union di'evid. When the Gemara said don't make a gzeira They said that's only b'di'evet. L'chatchila, you should make exer. B'di'evet, if you didn't do it, it works. So Rav Vosner presented three solutions to why the Ramah was goyzer, even though the Gemara said not to make exer. Number one, people do not know which substances are defined as makbid. Perhaps others are makbid even if she is not, which still renders the substance a chatzitzah. And the Gemara's declaration refers to b'di'evet, but the chatchila decrees may be instituted. Rav Ovadia Yosef also addresses this issue and states that Rav Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, does not accept the Ramah's stringency as normative. It's only a chumrah of the Ramah. Because of Ramah, ba'gov l'chatchila lo tidbo afilu b'dvarim she'en chotetzim, gzer mishum ha'chotetzim, aval Marana Beis Yosef eino sover chumrah zo. The Marana Beis Yosef didn't bichlal follow that chumrah at all. That you have to remove it. It's l'chatchila that she could go in the mikveh in that fashion. Okay, very interesting. Machlokas between the Ramah and the Beis Yosef there. Now, objects loosely placed upon the body. The Gemara in Shabbos 57a discusses type of loosely fitting woven cloth that women would wear as a hair accessory, like a hair net. The Gemara relates that women were particular about the cloth and would remove it before immersing in the mikveh. In explaining this Gemara, Rishonim debate whether something that is loosely placed upon the body, not just the hair, constitutes a Chatzitzah. Rashi asserts that women would particularly remove the cloth because it would become dirty when dampened, but it would not be considered a Chatzitzah. They were more concerned about the hairnet becoming dirty. However, Rashi's teachers explain that even those things that fit loosely may constitute a Chatzitzah, and the woman removed these cloths for this reason. Let's see Rashi. Rabbi Sai, my teachers, Mefarshim Hachpedeling Chatzitzah, not because of the problem with the cloth becoming dirty. Kedekaimalan, Rubo, Miuto, Umakpid Alav Chotzes. That even if some minority people are makpid on it, we should remove it. Says Rashi v'kashli b'gavatuva, but Rashi had a problem with that. Chada, d'chi itmar hayi b'midi d'midik itmar. Rashi says, if the Gemara was concerned, it was something that was tied tightly on her hair. Bashmin dafagav d'lo aili be'maya, and that the chiddush was, even though water doesn't easily go in there, kiven lo kapid alei chashev kagufe. Since people don't remove it, right? They're not makbid to remove it. It's part of her body. Ubat to lagabi saro, and it becomes like part of her hair. So it's not a chatzitza. But if it's an item that is not tied tightly on her hair, and water goes in, what kind of chatzitza is there? Halav choitzitzu. It's allowing the water to go in. So, with respect to the halacha conclusion of this question, the Shulchan Aruch in Yeridea 198 rules that rings and other loose-fitting items do not constitute a chatzitza, which appears to follow the opinion of Rashi. But the Pischei Tshuva comments that Achronim still consider both opinions to the issue. Because of a Sefer Levushe Sra, the Zula Shono, Avagav Demaya Eilibu, even though the woman is wearing something not tight, but where water could go through, Umayazik Masha Makpedes Lasiram. I mean, what would be the damage even if she is makpid to remove it because the water is getting in there? For Kosav Beis Yosef, the Hatur Posak Raboisa Shel Rashi, the Hanu Dinim Desif Aleph, the Rov, or makpid choitzitz, that even a majority on a person's body, or if he's makpid, it's a chatzitza. Mairi, after Aili Maya. That is relating to items that are loose fitting and water goes in there. Achein adrisha uprisha, which were other mafarshe hatur choylek, the das Rashi ikar, that if it's loose, it would not be considered a chatzitzah at all. So practically, most poskim rule that loose-fitting items do not constitute a chatzitzah. Nevertheless, you should remove them lechatchila if possible, which the Ramah would likely recommend in any case. Though one may be lenient if the tefillah was performed already. And this conclusion is stated clearly by Rav Mordechai Eliyahu and Rav Elyashiv Noel, who was the rabbi of the Kvaratzion community. He wrote a sefer Ish v'Isha. Says the Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, Dover achoitzetz dafka mu davuk laguf olashar l'sayar. If someone is wearing something which is tied tightly on the body or in her hair, that's a dover achoitzetz that should be removed. Aval imhu rafui, if it's loose fitting, af im makpidim alav, even if it's something that the woman normally would remove before going into the mikveh. Ein a chotzetz. Technically, it's not a chatzitzah. Yesh cholkin v'ormim shedavar shemakbin alav chotzetz, af im eino davik l'kuf. There are machmirim that even if it's not tight, it would be a chatzitzah. So therefore, l'chatchila noagim lachmir kamoisam. L'chatchila, the mikveh ladies will tell the women to remove it anyways. Ach, isha shekvar tovla. But she already went. Only afterwards it was discovered, she was wearing that. She doesn't have to go back and do it again. And the Isha says the same thing. If it's something that is loose, you should remove it. But if b'diavad it was found to be on after the fact, it's okay. Rav Vosner mentions that this issue is relevant to objects such as loose-fitting rings, and notes an additional basis for leniency if the item is somewhat remote from the body. Nafkamina is that bitabos. He says rings. Im lahakel berufyam. If the ring is loose, let's say she's wearing a loose bracelet, right? Something loose. You could be makel in that situation. We call malkum nira dafka kshemunach al haguf. But these are items that are on the body. Aval meruchak me'aguf lo shayach chatzitzah. But if it's not really close to the body, it's not a chatzitzah at all. Not sure what he's thinking about, but anyways, he says if it's not directly on the body, it's bichlal not in the discussion regarding chatzitzah. What about hair? The Gemara in Sukkah discusses how the Torah goes out of its way to include hair in the law of Chatzitzah, such that knotted and tangled hair, by virtue of obstructing water from freely flowing to all the hair, constitutes a formal barrier. However, not every knot in the hair constitutes a Chatzitzah by Torah law. So let's learn the Sugi in the Gemara. Masech the Sukkah, Heyom et Beis. Shiurin, the various dinim regarding measurements, chatzitzin, the laws regarding chatzitzah, umechitzon, what constitutes a halachic mechitzah to, for example, establish a reshus hayachid on Shabbos. It's got to be 10 tvachim high. There can't be any openings there can't be any pirtzas greater than 10 amos. All of these laws, and what is choitzitz and what is not choitzitz, the source is halach l'mosh misin. And the Gemara goes into detail. Chatzitzin, for the Gemara, chatzitzin, what do you mean halach l'mosh misin? Doraisa ninu. It's a Torah law. Because v'rachatz et tzurba M'Rabanan, shlo yedavar choitzitz ben olav amayim. So, how could you call it a halach l'mosh misin? Right? And for the Gemara, ki asoy hilchasa l'saro. Halacha Moshe Sinai was related to the dinim regarding what to do with her hair. That means, in a chanami, having a chatzitz on your body is a Torah law. But the dinim that were established regarding how does the hair, if it's tangled or knotted in a certain way, constitute a chatzitza, that was learned halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Freik the Gemara, what do you mean? Saranami deraisa ninu. The dinim of hair is also deraisa. Dichsiv vrachatz es b'saro b'mayim. The Torah didn't have to use the word es. It could have said vrachatz b'saro b'mayim. What is the es? Vrachatz the. She shall wash her, the s. Like we have Shimon Amsoini Dorish Kol Esim Shabbat. We have Breishis Bar Lokim Esa Shamayim the Esa Aretz. You didn't need that. You could have just said Breishis Bar Lokim Hashamayim the Haaretz. So every time in the Torah where this extra word es is placed, so Shimon Amsoini would darshan it until he got to Es Hashem Elokecha Tira. He could have just said Hashem Elokecha Tira. You shall fear Hashem. What's the S? So, who could you fear beyond HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So Reb Shimon Amsoini said, you know what? We can't learn, we can't do drushes on the S anymore. And the Talmidim said, well, what do you mean? Es Hashem Elokecha Tira appears much later in the Torah. What about all the drushes you taught us about S? You may have taught us hundreds of drushes until this spot. What do we do with that? He says, this kashem shekibati schar ala drisha, kach kibati schar ala drisha, ala prisha. Just like I got schar for darshaning all those essays, the fact that I came up with an intellectual inconsistency, and I have to reject all of those drushes because it doesn't work anymore, I'll get schar for that too. Comes Rabbi Akiva to say no. Es Hashem Elokecha Tira lerabois talmidei chachamim. The S, who else should you fear? Talmidei chachamim. And so he sort of resuscitated. So from there you see the concept of darshaning the word S. So the Gemara says, Es hatofel libsaro. The S is that which is subservient to the skin, which is the hair. So l'chura, it's also a d'oraisa dikadin, not a halach l'Moshe Sinai. So ki asa hilchasa l'charav Yitzchak. That means the parameters. That means the ikar adin, that hair is a chatzitzah, is established midaraisa. But what are the gedorim of that? How much should it be knotted? What's the shiurim of hair? That came to Rav Yitzchak from halach. It's correct about halach l'Moshe Sinai. So as we have seen, like other parts of the body, hair is subject to chatzitzah. When hair is entangled and knotted, water will be obstructed from reaching all of the hair. Accordingly, a woman must wash and comb her hair before she immerses. And we're going to have a shear on chafifa, which is, how she's supposed to treat her hair before going to the mikveh. However, not all knots constitutes barriers, as is evident from the following passage in the Gemara Nida, which is also mentioned in the Gemara in Sukkah, which we discussed. A single hair tied in a knot is a chatzitzah. Shalosh, einen chatzitzahs. 3 hairs cannot be tied so tightly that water can't get in between them. So that's why 3 hairs knotted is not a chatzitzah. Shtayim, eini yodea. 2, Rabbi Yochanan was mesupik. He was in doubt. Is it or is it not? Rav Yochanan Amar, Anu ein lanu ela achas. The Masorah was only 1 hair, if it's knotted. but two or more do not provide a Chatzitzah. And the Shulchan Aruch goes directly to the Gemara, adopts the position of Rabbi Yochanan, that only one hair with a knot constitutes a Chatzitzah. Shtei saros or yoiser, shayikshrim ke'echad, kesher echad, einam chaytzitzim. Two hairs that are tied up, that's not a Chatzitzah. Says the Ramah, ve'ein chilik beinim kesher shtei saros im shtei saros. You have to have two hairs tied with two other hairs. Or shekosher rosh shtei saros b'fnei atzman, or the ends of the two hairs are tied to each other. However, says the Ramah, one hair that's tied is a Chatzitzah. And if she's makpid on it, if she doesn't really care that it's knotted, also lo tefillah. The tefillah would work. Unless 51% of her hair, the individual hairs, had been knotted, then that would constitute a Chatzitzah, even if Eina Makpedes, even if she didn't care about that. That's what the Ramah says. So what is the halacha if there are no knots in the hair, but multiple strands become stuck together due to perspiration? The Mishnah Mikvos, as explained by the Rambam, deals with this case and states that this does not constitute a Chatzitzah since people are not makpid on it. Elu shein choitzitzin, the Mishnah says these are things that are not choitzitz. Kal kalei harosh, which is matted hair. Ubeis hashechi, the armpits. Ubeis hastorm beish, the genital regions. Eliezer oimer, echad ha'ish ve'echad ha'isha, man and woman, kol ha'makpid alav choitzitz. It all depends. If they're particular about it, it's a Chatzitzah. If she'ena makpid alav, ain't a Chatzitzah. Says the Perush Rambam al Mishnayos, kal kalei harosh ubeis hashechi, hasvach shemistabek haseir v'naseh lovu. This is talking about when it becomes matted together. Bein sar harosh or sar bote hashechi. Whether it's the armpit, whether it's the head. However, the Shulchan Aruch distinguishes between hair in these areas and hair in other parts of the body. Say arsha geneged alev v'shebezaken. Hair near the chest or in the beard, hanidbak zeh b'zeh machmazeh, that are stuck because of sweat and matted, chotzeitz. Sheberosh v'shebebeis hashechi ain't a chotzeitz. But on the head or in the armpit, it's not a chatzitza. Would seem that since the determination of when a joined hairs constitute a chatzitza depends upon akpada, when people are particular about it. And if times have changed, the halacha may change as well. Consequently, since people today are generally particular about all hair that gets stuck together due to perspiration, the halacha of chatzitza may change accordingly, as Rav Wosner pointed out. Totally b'mitzias. You know, the reality today might be different than the reality 200 years ago. Maybe in their times they were not makpid, but this is one of those examples where the din will change based on the mitzias of reality. And Rav Mordechai Eliyahu adopts this position definitively and requires women to unravel such hairs if it got stuck, not knotted, but matted prior to tefillah. Sayara rosh, hanidvak machmazeya, hair that's stuck together because of perspiration. Chotzeitz. Yanoshim makpidos sarosan tiana nekios v'lodvekas v'chadoma. Women are makpid that their hair is straight, that they're not stuck together, and therefore it's considered hakpada. Lachein isha shechafafa, a woman who washed her head, v'shasa ben a chafifa l'tefillah, but there was a delay between when she did the chafifa and the immersion. And in the meantime, her hair became matted because of sweat. She has to rinse her hair a second time before the tefillah. Okay. I don't think we're going to be able to finish makeup, and I think makeup is a detailed thing that's going to take us some time to learn, and we'll continue. We'll finish up the laws of Chatzitzah next week. Same
Ernie.
time. Yes.
You know, we're talking about mikvahs. There's a story about a woman who wanted to convert. She goes to a local rabbi. She tells him all the reasons why she wants to convert. He tries to dissuade her once, twice, three times. Finally, he gives in. He gives her tons of books to read, classes to go to. She says, you'll see, I'm going to be the best convert you've ever worked with. A year later, she comes to him. She proves that she knows everything. Kashrut, she knows everything. He says, one more thing. You have to go to the mikvah. He gives her the address. Says there's an attendant there. She'll guide you through it. She gets to the mikveh. The attendant shows her where to change. She comes out with the robe. She starts climbing down the stairs. She gets up to her throat. And she says, I can't go any further. And the attendant got very upset. She says, you have to. This is part of the process. You have to completely immerse. She says, but I can't do it. I have a phobia with water. Calls the rabbi. Attendant says, Rabbi, we've got a problem. This lady can't immerse her head. She says, what are you talking about? She says, she has a phobia with water. She just can't do it. She says, she can't do it. Let me think. Finally gets back on the phone. He says, you know what? Let her go. It's okay. So she'll have a goyish cup. All right. I'll stick to what I do.